Good morning. I'm Bonnie Gardner. I'm co-chair of the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Welcome. Our forums are free and open to the public and occur most Sundays at noon. We encourage you to attend. Our mission is to nurture the mind and the spirit and serve social justice. Today, I'm honored and so happy to introduce Gina Hinojosa, who will be speaking on public education and how it will loom large in the 85th legislative session. She's an expert on public education issues and is probably going to be the defining issue for the upcoming legislative session in Texas. Recently, the Texas education finance system was declared unconstitutional, and we're waiting for a final decision from the Texas Supreme Court on how to handle financing of education. We've got a lieutenant governor who's identified vouchers as his priority for the next session, and a new version of the federal No Child Left Behind Act has recently passed, so that includes broad authority to give the states back influence on educational programming. Also, Gina Hinojosa is now our state representative for many of us, District 49. She won the Democratic primary hands down. There was no runoff, and so far she doesn't have a Republican contender for this office. So, with minimal wear and tear on her and everyone else, we can anticipate that she will be our state representative, hopefully for many years to come. Let me tell you a little bit about Gina. She is a native Texan who went to public schools. And she went to UT Austin, graduated with honors from the Plan 2 program, then went to George Washington University Law School in D.C. She herself is the daughter of legal aid lawyers in the Valley. And she grew up being steeped in social justice and activism from a very young age. Her mother was actually born in Mexico and immigrated to the U.S. Gina is now living with her husband, who's also an attorney, John Denisi, and her two sons in Hyde Park. And she previously, before her new position as our state legislator, which will take effect next January, she was elected board president of the Austin Independent School District Board in 2012. So she has tremendous experience in the area of planning and for educational programming and in educational finance. So it's my pleasure to introduce Gina Hinojosa. Let's welcome her.
Thank you, Bonnie. I appreciate that introduction. I forget things about myself when people go over my bio, so thank you for going over that, and thank you for the invitation to speak. I see so many friends in the audience. I feel very much welcome and at home. And I appreciate the invitation to speak about education, which is my passion and really the reason that I ran for the Texas legislature. The reason I originally ran for the school board was because my son's school was threatened for closure. And I was upset about that and decided to run for the school board and got elected to that. And the reason that I'm running for, and I am still running, it's not official. I do have to be on the ballot in November. I don't have a Republican candidate, and it is too late for a Republican to file to run against me. But the reason that I decided to run anyway is because our biggest challenge in our public schools is really finance. we keep having to do more with less in our public schools, and that is a state fight. We've done a lot locally to try to ameliorate those problems, but really the big solution is at the state, and that's why I decided to run. As Bonnie said, their education will be, I believe, the biggest issue at the Texas legislature next session, and that's for three reasons. One, as we heard, the state finance system has been declared unconstitutional by Judge Dietz locally, and so we are awaiting a decision from the Texas Supreme Court on that. And the reason why it's been declared unconstitutional, maybe not everyone knows, but I brought with me a passage from our Texas Constitution. It's Article 7, Section 1, says, a general diffusion of knowledge being essential to the preservation of the liberties and rights of the people, it shall be the duty of the legislature of the state to establish and make suitable provision for the support and maintenance of an efficient system of public free schools. So it is a constitutional right that we have to public schools here in this state, and it has, our system has been declared unconstitutional several times before, and this is the latest time, and we feel it in our school districts. This is the reason why so many school districts all over the state of Texas joined in the lawsuit against the state to declare the system unconstitutional. And so this Texas Supreme Court could make one of several findings. They could affirm the lower decision and say that there is a problem and mandate that the legislature take action to correct that problem. They could overturn the judge's decision, which I don't like to think about that, but they could do that, overturn the judge's decision. They could say that they could take some combination of it. It's really hard to know what the Texas Supreme Court will do. Regardless of what they do, I will tell you we are in crisis mode in our public schools. And here in Austin, for instance, and I brought a little handout. My printer was running out of ink, so I didn't get to make enough copies, but I did bring some copies. If you could look at these and pass them around. What is a primary problem here for our community in Austin, and that is how much we pay into recapture in the state. So what's also known as Robin Hood, where the property wealthy school districts pay into the system, the education finance system for the whole state, and money then is apportioned out into the property poor school districts. Well, I'm originally from Brownsville, Texas, a beneficiary of that system, and I do believe that it is a good system. However, it needs to be updated, and currently we are having to send Austin stands alone really in the amount of money that we are unique in the amount of money that we send to this state to pay for this system, and we are sending about $1,000 for every property. For every property taxpayer sends about $1,000 annually in their property tax bill to the state to pay into the system. And the primary reason it's broken for us, well, one is because the state is not investing its fair share into the entire system out of general revenue, and instead the state is relying very heavily on these property taxes. But there's something that I passed out, and it's called the Cost of Education Index. And you can think of it as a cost of living index, and that is the value that is plugged into the formula that decides which school districts give what. And that hasn't been updated in about 30 years. And so it pegs our cost of living, our cost of education, right under Killeen, you'll see on that list, which is laughable. Right? It's under Brownsville, where I'm from, well under Brownsville, under lots of school districts, and we know that that's just not the case. And so that really is what's hurting us. We have here in Austin the lowest paid teachers of any urban district in the state. We are ranked second to lowest amongst surrounding school districts when we look at how much we pay our teachers. And we all know that cost of living in this community has skyrocketed, and our teachers just can't afford to live here and work here anymore. And so we are in a crisis mode. We need to do something about this. This year alone, we just sent about $275 million to the state in 1 year under recapture. In the next 4 years, it'll be $1.8 billion. it grows every year, and we just can't sustain it. So we need this updated. I was grateful to see that the Speaker of the House has listed improving or eliminating the cost of education index as a priority, as an interim charge for the House Education Committee. So there is will on both sides of the aisle, frankly, to look into this and try to improve it, so that makes sense. But there is no community really in the state that for whom the stakes are as high as Austin, because we just pay so much into the system. And we do have tremendous need in our school district. We have over 60% of our families, of our students, are economically disadvantaged. So we do have great need in our own urban school district. So regardless of what the court decides, we will need something to change in our education finance system. I mentioned that we've taken some efforts within this city to address this problem, and I'm very grateful that we have city leadership that has accepted the challenge to work with us on behalf of our students, for the benefit of our students. What we decided to do about 2 years ago was, and this was with the old city council before we had the 10-1 system, we went to our city council members and said, we pay for so many social services for our families, and the city pays for social services. Well, we have to charge the taxpayer about twice as much to pay for these same social services that the city could pay for dollar for dollar, because we have to send so much to the state under recapture. And wouldn't it make more sense for our community, since our education dollars are so precious and there's a premium on them, that the city pays for social services for these families in our school district? And so the city stepped up 2 years ago, beginning with the last city council, to pay for parent support specialists in our schools who connect families up with social services around the city, and to pay for after-school programming and summer programming for families that can't afford to pay for those themselves. And so we are so thankful of that partnership. It did help our school district a lot. We will be working, and I'm hopeful, at a continued partnership, whether it looks like continuation of the funding of those services. The new council adopted the same, also decided to pay for those same services. The mayor and the school district have been talking about a potential tax swap, where in order to pay for some of these services that we don't get funding to pay for, we would decrease our tax rate in the ISD a bit, and the city could take on some of the social services, or maybe pre-K, that we pay for, because we also don't get full funding for pre-K from the state. We pay for that. We really make up money to pay for that here locally, because we don't get that from the state. But there is limited money, and so funding these education in the state is going to be a big challenge. We will go into the next latest legislative session with a very constrained budget situation. As you may have heard, the price of oil, I just filled up my gas tank on my way over here. Price of oil is very low, and it's going to affect our general revenue here in the state. And so we have diverted money away from the general revenue by a cut in the margins tax, by diverting money in for the cost of building roads from our general revenue. And so we will have a very difficult legislative session next session when it comes to budget, not to mention the fact that we don't have an income tax. And so, as we heard at our state convention yesterday, Representative Donna Howard, who is present, mentioned we're missing that third leg of the stool that we need to really sustain an economy or a finance system in the state that makes sense. We're missing that third leg. We have property taxes that we rely on heavily, and also sales tax, but we don't have an income tax. So for all those reasons, we will be hard pressed to find money to pay for these challenges. But as we know, you pay for what's a priority, and education it's a constitutional priority for the state, and it's a priority for many families in this state. Also, as Bonnie mentioned, vouchers will be looming large next session because our Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has said it is his primary focus for next session, and there is a new vouchers mechanism that has been tried in other states that he would like to try this time around in Texas. I believe that vouchers take much-needed dollars away from our public schools, drain much-needed, already scarce dollars from our public schools, and so that is something that I will oppose. It is also, there's an issue with accountability when it comes to vouchers because private schools don't meet the same accountability standards that our public schools meet, and for those reasons, that will be something I will oppose. I know many within the legislature will oppose that, and so we will see what happens there. Last session, there was an effort to pass vouchers, and that failed. There seemingly were not the votes, at least in the House, to get that passed, and so we were saved from that last session, but again, it will be tried again this session. Also, Bonnie mentioned that there was a rewrite of what was known as the No Child Left Behind Act that really put in place the federal accountability system for our public schools. Well, the rewrite was passed in December. It's called the Every Student Succeeds Act, and what it does is it pushes power back down to the states so that the accountability system really is within the hands of the state and local government. We don't really know exactly what that means yet. The federal government is still, the Department of Education is still writing rules to implement the Every Student Succeeds Act, and we will see what that means for Texas. It's a little bit scary, considering some of our challenges at our legislature, but it will be very important for families to be heard, for our supporters of public schools to be heard on this issue at the legislature. And on that note, I do want to say, I want to end on a positive note, because so often when we're talking about the legislature, it's just doom and gloom. But I think that there is reason to be hopeful. And I'll tell you that part of my background in politics really comes from my involvement with a group called Austin Interfaith. And I don't know if this church is or has been a member of Austin Interfaith. But so through my church, I got involved on issues for middle-class families. And primarily we were involved in an issue at that time on living wage, and also an issue for teacher health care benefits at the school district. And so those were some issues I was proud to work on in coalition with other people in different churches, labor unions, neighborhood associations, and schools who cared about the same issues. And so it's my experience that when you get people together, you find that we have a lot in common across different faith traditions, even cross-party lines. And while Democrats are few in number at the legislature, I do believe that many of the issues we care about, Texans across the state and Republicans care about. And when it comes to public education in particular, I was surprised, I guess I shouldn't have been surprised to learn at a school board convention, state school board convention, that rural Republicans were just as mad at the Texas legislature as we were, because they understand that we need these funds for our public schools. And for many rural communities in the state of Texas, rural conservative communities, public schools is really it's their biggest employer. It's the hub of the community. It's where everybody gathers for Friday night football. And so there's a lot of support for public schools in rural communities across the state. So when I started to hear this at some of our state conventions, I thought, well, we really need to reach out across the state to supporters of public education. We are somewhat limited as Austinites and what is known as a progressive community at the legislature, though we don't let it stop us, and we're there to be heard. Our influence is somewhat limited by the perception that we are just progressive Austinites. And so we had the idea of reaching out to colleagues across the state to bring Republicans and just supporters of public schools from rural communities. We had school board school board members, we had some superintendents, we had the chambers of commerce from every urban school district all come together. Here's a picture. It's kind of a fuzzy picture, and again, not enough copies, of us gathering together last legislative session at the legislature in support of public education. We were specifically advocating for $3 billion more in funding for public education. $3 billion happened to be the price tag of a bill that was sponsored by the chair of the Education Committee, Chairman Aycock, a Republican, a moderate Republican who didn't seek re-election. But he had a bill that would have given most students in the state of Texas more funding for their public school. I think it was something like 97% of kids would have received more funding for their education under this bill. No students would have received less. It would have done away with the cost of education index because it is broken, and $3 billion was the price tag. And so that was the number that we latched onto. We didn't, as a group, take a position on that bill because not all school districts were in support of it. And that is really the challenge that we have when it comes to public education. We really have to work hard not to let those who are attacking public education divide us, because oftentimes it's the small school districts versus large school districts, rural versus urban, and we get pitted against one another and we all lose. And that's frankly what happened, I believe, in the last legislative session, where we ended up having some Democrats from South Texas oppose this bill initially because, ultimately as well, because the poorer school districts didn't receive more of the more. And so we need to figure out ways where we can just come together so we don't all lose in advance funding for our public schools. We are, again, in crisis mode, and I am hopeful that there are even Republicans who recognize this and who might be willing to come together to work on this issue next session. And that's the only way we're going to get anything done, is if our legislators hear from all of us, Democrats, Republicans, urban, rural, alike, to understand that public education is important to this state. And I was so thankful that we had our chambers of commerce come and stand with us to advocate for more funding. And you'll see in that picture that is a school board member from Houston who's also a Chamber of Commerce member. I think he's an oil executive in Houston who spoke that day. We didn't speak as members of the Austin board. We just kind of orchestrated it and put everybody else front and center because we knew that our influence wasn't as great as some others. But we were happy to do that. We had a pretty robust presence at the legislature this last session as Austin ISD, and really tried to work with Republicans and Democrats alike. So we will see what is in store, but this is a priority of mine and a priority for so many, and it is really heartening to see such support for our public schools in Austin. Having just come off the campaign trail, I was all across this district talking to people about public schools, and this is a community that supports public schools, and I'm very proud to be a part of this community and hopeful that we can get something done about this. I know every time I'm at the legislature, I joked yesterday, I feel like it's seasonal sport in Austin. When the legislature is in town, there's always friends there. I'll run into somebody and ask, what are you doing here? But we're always there making sure that we're heard on what's important to us. And I know public education is one of those issues, and we'll be specifically, I want to challenge you all to be there with us in support of our public schools next session. And that's about all I have right now, but I know Bonnie is going to ask if there are any questions for me. I'm happy to speak more.
Yes, and let's give her a big hand, and then we'll get to the questions. I know we're all interested in this topic, vitally so.
Okay, I'm going to make a very short statement. There is plenty of money for public education. You just don't know how to get it or can't get it. You should tax some of the corporations which are getting by with too little. It seems to me vouchers should be unconstitutional. But would you explain in simple terms this statement that says Texas educational finance system has been declared unconstitutional? I didn't understand that. If you could make it a little more clear.
We have a local judge, Judge Dietz, who heard the case where school districts across the state challenged the state finance system as inadequate, claiming that the state was not investing enough into our public schools so that it was adequate under the provision of Article 7 of our Texas Constitution that I read at the beginning. And so that was the basis for the challenge. Judge Dietz did believe that there was merit to that claim. And so now what has happened, then Attorney General Greg Abbott appealed that decision. And I'll tell you, it was something. So we were at the Texas Association of School Boards convention, and it was during campaign season, and we had both gubernatorial candidates. We had Wendy Davis and we had Greg Abbott come address us in this huge auditorium full of school board members from across the state. And we heard from Wendy Davis, and then we heard from Greg Abbott, and we heard them both say that education was their number one priority. Public education was their number one priority. And I walked out of that auditorium feeling pretty good about our way forward. And there was a tweet that the Attorney General had just appealed the lawsuit that said that the finance system was inadequately funded. And I really was in disbelief that had happened at the same time I was hearing how it was a priority. But anyway, that's what happened. And so now this decision is before the Texas Supreme Court, which is predicted to decide any day, really, whether Judge Dietz's decision will stand, whether it will be modified or reversed. And I agree, I wanted to address, it is a matter of prioritizing what's important to us in this state. And I do believe, and I'm not sure if you were referencing one thing that's often been talked about in this community, and that's about the way we tax commercial properties versus people's homes. Is that what you meant? That's what I understood you to mean. And I do believe we need, at the very least, disclosure of the sales of our property, commercial property, so we can see what is it that we're missing in this revenue, because it is believed that we are not generating the kind of revenue that we could if we were really taxing our commercial properties at value.
My question is again sort of related to vouchers. One of the arguments that are made for vouchers in private schools is to allow people that are on the gifted end of the spectrum to reach their full potential. That seems like that could also be done within the public school system if there were allowances made for people in that way. Could you comment, one, what is available for gifted students in the current AISD, and two, is that a potential argument to help defeat vouchers?
Well, I appreciate you raising that, Douglas, because one thing that is often touted by supporters of vouchers is, well, we need to give families choice, whether it's for families who have children who are gifted, families who have children with all sorts of other needs or desires. And I know within AISD we offer a lot of choice, and we have a liberal transfer system where you reference gifted students. We do have gifted and talented programming in our schools. We do also have one of the top nationally ranked programs or schools for high achieving students, and that's our Liberal Arts and Sciences Academy, LASA. It's a magnet school for students who are achieving at a higher level. And but we have all sorts of choice in our school district. We have dual language. We have Chinese and Vietnamese dual language in addition to Spanish. We have fine arts schools, now fine arts elementary schools as well as middle schools and high schools. We have a school in South Austin at on South Congress, and of course the name of it is escaping me. Fulmore School. We have Fulmore, which offers I think of it as a school for aspiring lawyers and politicians that focuses on those issues for students. So we have an array of choices for our students. Not to mention, I don't know if you all know about the Rosedale School, which is a school for students who are with significant disabilities. Which is every time I go there, I'm just amazed and just so proud and thankful of our community for providing that school for students who have severe disabilities. And so we have an array of choices. My biggest fear with what I believe is a movement towards the privatization of our schools is that we lose the people's voice in decision making about our children and about our students. So as I said, the reason I ran was because for the school board was because I was upset about my son's school being closed. Well, as we move resources out of our public schools, and it hurts our public schools because we lose those economies of scales, and we lose public schools. I mean, this is why public schools across the country have been shut down, because they don't have the resources to keep all these schools open. And that's why our schools were under threat, frankly, several years ago, because our local school board and our superintendent locally were panicked about the cuts to public education and thought, well, one way to save money is to close schools. I didn't think that was the right way, but that's what inspired it. It was fear of just these cuts, and that's what's happened across the country. And I believe our public schools are our purest form of democracy. I mean, it's where my cell phone number is on my AISD website. I am accessible. All our school board members are accessible. It's parents who run for school board, PTA leaderships. These are our schools, and we decide what is right for our families and our students. And what we see often in the privatization movement is it begins in communities that are already somewhat disenfranchised, and so they're losing robust public school system, and they're losing their voice. And I don't think that a non-elected body, whether it's a nonprofit board or a private corporate board making those decisions, is an appropriate substitute for a democratically elected governing body. And so that is why I believe so strongly in our public schools, and I will fight to protect them.
Yes, I'm concerned about the declining enrollment in the public schools, and I know some people just anecdotally who are moving their kids into charter schools. Right. Could you talk a little bit about charter schools? What's the oversight there, and do you see them as part of the declining enrollment problem?
Yes. Well, declining enrollment is definitely a challenge for AISD, and I'll give you some of the reasons why we have declining enrollment. You mentioned charters, and that is definitely one of them. Our primary reason for declining enrollment is the recession. And so during that recession, less babies were born. And so we are seeing declining enrollment primarily in our lower grades. And so that accounts for a large part of it. The second biggest reason for our declining enrollment is affordability. I mentioned that the cost of living, and we all know this, the cost of living in Austin has skyrocketed, and families simply can't afford to live here anymore and are choosing to leave Austin for to live in a more affordable community. The third reason is both charter schools and private schools. We're losing families to charter schools and private schools, and I do believe that. So that is absolutely a reason why. We are losing students. We are competing in a way that we hadn't competed before, frankly. And I think although it is scary, I don't know where this charter school movement is going, and it's scary to me. And I talked about my support for public schools because I believe we need to have elected bodies governing our schools. I do believe that there was some good that came from charter schools. It has made us step up our game, and so we are doing a much better job than we've ever done before about getting information out about all the choices and the good things in our public schools. We have more to do and more to learn because we're new at this. And so, for instance, we just dedicated money from our last budget to a marketing plan, which we had never done before. We probably would have never been allowed to do in this community before, but we have to do it now because charter schools dedicate a lot of funding to marketing, but we really, we have a lot to brag about, and so we need to do a better job about really communicating to families in Austin about all the good things that our public schools are doing and all the good options. One of the things that we've done recently that was an idea of Trustee Julie Cowan, and I think it was a fabulous idea, is we've invited the realtors to come and tour our public schools and some of our under-enrolled schools. Because realtors are often, because with so many people moving to Austin, realtors are often a family's first contact with our schools. And so we wanted to educate our realtors about all the wonderful things going on in our public schools. And I went on the first of these tours with the realtors. It was a middle school in South Austin, and it was a fine arts middle school in South Austin. And I was standing next to this realtor, and we were just going to classroom, seeing all these remarkable things. Because let me just tell you that public school today is nothing like public school when I was a kid, and I think like public schools that most of us attended. To see what these students are doing is so awe-inspiring and remarkable. The realtor next to me started crying. She was so moved by what she saw, and I do think that there is this narrative about public schools, our public schools, especially urban public schools, not being good. When our public schools are doing more than we've ever done and providing choices and options and achieving at higher levels than we ever have. And it's just that we need to step up our game at getting that narrative out there. And really, that takes more than a school board, takes more than a school district. It takes all of us being advocates for our public schools and taking the time to learn about our public schools. And so that's one of the challenges that we have in this community and that public school supporters all across this country have currently.
We have a question from State Representative Donna Howard.
Well, we're thrilled that you're going to be joining us at the legislature. You're going to be bringing a very unique set of understanding, skills, so forth, especially in the realm of public education. I also came from a school board, but it was, over 10 years ago when I did. But when I came, one of the things that I was looking at was where our low-performing schools were. And certainly at that point in time anyway, the ones that we had were all on the east side of our community. I don't know how many we have right now, but the ones that I know about are still on the east side. We have challenges in the legislature from those, particularly in the business community, who claim that we are not efficiently and adequately using what we have to make sure that all students are getting what they need. You just talked about the fact that we do have some wonderful things going on in our schools. I've visited them as well, and I totally agree with you. Great things to talk about, and huge improvements in what's been going on in the Austin community in our schools. So with that being said, though, we know that there are still challenges to make sure that every student has the same opportunities at their neighborhood school. From your experience on the Austin School Board, how do you think you could address with some, like at the Texas Association of Business, the things that we could do that would actually help us move in the direction we want to go, rather than looking at how we might need to offer these alternatives, that there are ways we can address it within the current public school system?
Well, thank you for that question, Representative Howard, and you have been a hero to all of us in the public school community, and the work that you've done for our public schools is so appreciated. And I'm honored to have the opportunity to serve with you. And so I'm going to need a lot of help and guidance and mentoring when I get there. I really appreciate the question. One of the things that we've done in Austin, and I am just a big believer in, is the community schools approach. And what that is, and we have real success stories using the community schools approach, and the examples are Webb Middle School, Reagan High School, where it is expensive. Let me tell you, none of this is cheap. This all takes money. It takes an investment to have good public schools, but we invest now or we pay later. And let me stop to say that everything that I've seen about vouchers and charter schools demonstrates that uses at least as much money or substantially more of an investment to run those kinds of programs as our public schools. But the community schools approach is really about providing wraparound services to families, because a lot of these schools are populated by students who come from very low income, economically disadvantaged families. And so there is tremendous need. I mean, basic needs from just food on the table, keeping housing is such a huge need in this community, and our mobility rate is very high in Austin. So we have circumstances where we have families just who are moving monthly. We have families who are in motels, living in motels, and who are displaced during times like South by Southwest, and we really struggle to try to get these families housed. I mean, housing is a big challenge in this community. So with that said, children cannot learn if they're hungry, they're worried about where they're going to sleep at night, if they're worried if their parents are stressed because they don't have a job. All of these things affect a child's ability to learn. So what we've found and we've demonstrated at Webb Middle School and Reagan High School, those are our premier community school models, though we have aspects of this in all our schools. But our premier community school models are those where providing robust system of wraparound services for these families allows children to have those basic needs met so that they can show up ready to learn. And I'm very proud of the work, and this work preceded me. I can't take credit for it. I'm just a big cheerleader for it. But we invited some legislators last session to come visit, legislators who are proponents of charter schools, and Democrats as well. And so we had them come visit Webb Middle School. We had there was a Democratic senator who, when I went to visit him, said, "Oh, well, you know, I just like private schools," and he had been supportive of vouchers in the past because I like students in uniforms. So I said, "Come on, we have a school where we have students in uniforms," and so he was very impressed to see this. But again, it's about really, it's hard to believe unless you can see it, and we've been very welcoming and soliciting legislators who are non-believers to come visit, to see for themselves. And if you go to Reagan High School, Annabelle Garza is a principal there, and that school had been threatened with closure. And the community schools model is about wraparound services, but it's also about this we're all in this together mentality, where we cannot have successful public schools if our community is not supportive. We cannot have successful communities if our public schools aren't good. And so it's just the symbiotic relationship where we all take responsibility. The city council's investment in our social services is definitely part of that community schools model where we're all in this together. It's not this siloed approach to education. No, it takes all of us. So Annabelle Garza, the principal at Reagan High School, will say, when I have money, I hire people. I need people to help me do this. And she'll give this demonstration where she's got the person who is in charge of the parent support specialist, the person who is in charge of graduation, the person who is in charge of, all sorts of things, but takes people to really provide these support services to families. One of the other things that we've been real successful at doing is providing mental health services, mental health care services in our schools. And so now we have at all of our high schools and all of our Title I middle schools licensed mental health professionals there for our students. And I am a big believer in that. That was something we were able to do by pulling those 1115 federal waivers down and using that. Oops, sorry, I didn't think that was going to happen. And using that additional funding to help invest in this service for our schools. It's something we've brought legislative staffers from other legislators from other districts into witness as well to see how effective this has been at really addressing discipline issues, just mental health issues for our students. And so I do think it takes, I don't know if that's going to convince the Texas Association of Business. It's not a corporate model. Maybe it is. Maybe it should be. I don't know. But it's a people model. These are families. These are people who need help and who need services. And the places where we have had schools struggling are places that are economically depressed. I'll give you an example. We had an elementary school, a Title I elementary school last year. I think it was last year, if not the year before. I think it was last year. They didn't meet state accountability standards. Well, they had an incident where they had a mother commit suicide on campus a week or two before the test. Now, luckily, they got a waiver from the TEA commissioner after we demonstrated and we made the case and we fought to say this is just not fair. But these are communities that are already fragile. And we need to do what we can to support them and prop them up so those kids have a fighting chance. It's not, having a good teacher at the front of every classroom is essential, yes, but that's not the entire picture. There are more needs here, and it's really going to take all of us investing in providing this.
I was interested to get your comments about this new Every Student Succeeds Act. I know it's, as you mentioned earlier, it's a lot to be developed still, but what do you foresee as the area of debate, particularly with regard to testing and the evolution of testing in our state?
I think it will depend a lot. We have seen progress. In my opinion, maybe not all think it's progress when it comes to testing in this state. It seems that both Democrats and Republicans alike have understood that sometimes it seems like we're testing for the sake of testing, and that there were too many tests, too much of school time was spent on testing, and that the stakes were too high. And so we've seen last legislative session where the legislature approved now having these committees that can decide if there are students who don't pass the test, that can decide that a student can graduate if there are other circumstances and requirements are met. And these communities can just take a fresh look at the circumstance. These teachers can administrators can look at these circumstances and make this decision. We're making progress, and that's one demonstration of we're making progress in this area. But that happened because the legislature heard from concerned parents in this state who were just done with the over-testing. So I do believe that's going to continue to be an issue. Probably Representative Howard would have better insight on that since she's worked at the legislature on that issue. But I do believe that will continue to be a fight. There will be some who will push for higher stakes accountability testing, I believe. And I know in the past, for instance, the Texas Association of Business has advocated for more accountability, which has been testing in the system. So I believe that's at stake, and it is essential that the legislature hear from parents and communities about what's important when it comes to education to those families and what those families want. We have families, and I hear from families all the time who have decided to take their students out, their kids out of public schools because of the accountability system. And and so it is definitely hurting our ability to maintain families in our schools. But again, there are some parts of that I think were good originally, and one of the things that came to light in the high stakes accountability time is that there were schools that had been underperforming for too long and that were dismissed as really not being able to perform, and that this system has put an end to that. And so I don't think we can put the toothpaste back in the tube. I mean, I think that's always now. I think that's the case, but it went too far. And at this point, we have parents and students and teachers who are stressed out about a test, and no one's really sure if this testing is capturing what we're looking for. And I'll give you an example. Just as school board members, we're trying to figure out how to gauge whether students are making improvements, because when the testing looks at fourth grade one year and fourth grade the next, but it's not testing that's looking at that same fourth grader and how is that fourth grader performing on this same topic the next year. It's not looking at those kind of iterations of this for the same student. It's just looking at a new class. Okay, and so it's hard as school board members even to gauge whether what we're doing is working. And I think that is an indication that the system is broken if we can't get that information that we need from this test. So there have been talks about, well, should we do this other kind of test? Well, then that's just too much testing. And so I think that that we really need to look at why we're testing and what kind of information we're gathering from this testing. One of the things that the community schools model has done is one of the results of the testing accountability system has been that schools get shut down if they don't pass the test. And one of our approach and our advocacy had been at the legislature, rather than shutting down the school, which destabilizes our families that are already challenged, is why don't we just give that school resources and institute the community schools model in those schools. So rather than shut down the school and displace all these families, let's invest more in social service in this school. And so we made some progress last session with that model. It was eventually not allowed to come to the Senate floor. I don't know why, but it did pass the House and I believe the Senate Education Committee as well. But the community schools bill did not get to the Senate floor, and so that's something that I think we need to try next session as well. But thank you for your service at Garcia Middle School. That's the school where I took the senator to visit, and he was so impressed by what he saw there. But even that day that we went to visit, I was struck by the principal was taking roll. Everybody was in the cafeteria, and they called one student's name, and the student didn't answer. And then one kid said, "Oh, he moved away. Well, he's now living with his aunt." It was just that one day that we were visiting, you saw just families just not being there from one day to the next, and what a challenge that poses.
What are your thoughts about police presence on campus and how that affects discipline, possibly incorrectly, not being trained to handle youth, etc.?
Well, we have in most, if not all, urban school districts in Texas have our own PD. We have AISD PD here in Austin and at all of our high schools, and not all of our middle schools, but there is a lot of coverage of our middle schools. All of our police officers wear body cameras and have for many years, and we have had to, as a school board, make determinations about use of force and employment decisions made based on use of force. And I don't know how we could have done it really without those body cameras. So I believe those are essential, especially when it comes to police officers working with students. I'll say that as a mother with a child in public school, I appreciate it, and it makes me feel like our schools are more secure. We have in Austin campuses that are very open. built at a time when there wasn't as much concern about security. And as a result, it's harder on some of our campuses to limit access by those we don't want to be on our campus. And so I'm grateful that we do have trained professional police officers at our schools. That being said, it is so important. It is not the same as having a regular APD police officer at our schools, because we're dealing with developing minds. We're dealing with children. And so it's so essential that they have appropriate training to be working with students, and that they be trained most especially in how to de-escalate situations, and as well as our teachers, because that's often where we lose kids. We're not understanding how to respond to students. And so it's so important that our teachers and everybody who works with students are trained in ways to de-escalate situations and to get at what are the real issues affecting behavior, because often it'll be something happening at home, something that needs to be, the child is crying out for help. And so I'm glad that we have social services, we have counselors, mental health professionals on our campuses to deal with what are the underlying issues affecting behavior.
I know there are many schools across the country that have peer mediation.
Did you say peer?
Okay. Peer mediation. And to what degree the teachers are also trained in that, I don't know. My understanding is Austin does not use that. I wonder, particularly in the context of this community school issue, what role do you see for something like that, either in Austin or across the state or however?
One thing that we do utilize in AISD that there isn't a lot of data on, but anecdotally just people are very pleased with, is a restorative justice model. Part of that restorative justice model looks like a circle, right, and where you bring people into a circle of adults and peers, and we figure out what's going on in this situation. And I've never personally participated in one. This is my understanding of it. I need to participate in one. But it seems to be a model that has been effective in our schools. One thing that's interesting is I don't really understand how this happened. Someday I'm going to have to talk to Donna Howard about this. But so truancy has been decriminalized by the last legislature. And we are now looking at how do we address truancy differently, in a way that it doesn't address it as a crime for these students. Restorative practices is one model that has been used, but the county, with the mayor, appointees from the mayor, appointees from Sarah Eckhart, and the school district, we're involved in figuring out what does our new approach look like. I'm hopeful, and I've been advocating that it does include a strong restorative practices model. And if you believe that too, please let Sarah Eckhart and Mayor Hasler know that, because that is something that is being worked on now.
We want to thank you so much. We know that the school systems of Texas and our AISD and the legislature are going to benefit from your leadership and expertise in education. Gina, let's give her a big hand.
Thank you.
Thank you.